Hello, and welcome to the Tonic Accord. I don't know about you guys, but it seems like in this current political landscape, each podcast, news source, or opinion comes with a spin. Sometimes the spin takes you to the far left, other times the far right. Sometimes you don't even know that the spin is there, but in general, there seems to be a lack of a moderate voice in the media and in politics. Here at the Tonic Accord, we are truly hoping to help the middle get a voice, and to provide people with a centered and balanced message. A tonic chord is a very important reference in many forms of music. It describes two extreme notes, a high and a low, resonating simultaneously. In this chord, the addition of the middle note helps anchor down the sound, and it creates somewhat of a harmony and agreement between the other, more extreme notes. This can be a good metaphor for the importance of cooperation and discussion in politics. A country needs a moderate and sensible center to bring the outer extremes together. Good harmony is not only important for everyone, but it is better for the social fabric. And with that, let's get after it. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord. I'm Alex Kapitko. I'm a political science guy, and I'm currently working in Spain.
Hello, everyone. My name is Drew Nebley. I currently work in political media in Los Angeles.
Today is a special episode of the podcast because we have my friend Grayson Forsberg, who is here. I'm really happy to have him on the podcast. He's currently working for State Senator Dolly in Sacramento. He's a writer for the Convention of States. He created the Common Sense Chronicles, and he's going to be a law student. Grayson, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, guys.
Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the episode.
So like you said, Alex, I work for State Senator Dolly. Just started that pretty recently. I started as a state content writer and for the Convention of States, which is basically we try to talk about Article 5 of the Constitution, which basically kind of brings more power back to the states as opposed to the federal government. I created the Common Sense Chronicles, which is basically just I put out content and bring kind of a common sense viewpoint to certain political talking points. I graduated from University of California, Davis. I studied political science and international relations, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Sweet. Yeah, it's nice to have you on. I know we've been talking for a while about getting you on here. It's nice because I think we can really have a full scripted conversation now. We have three guys with, I think we can have a good conversation, but there's parts we're going to definitely disagree on. So I think it's going to be fun.
All right, so today we are doing a topic that I personally am really excited to talk about, and it is social media deplatforming. This has been coming up a lot recently with major social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and how prevalent they are in today's political climate, and how it relates to banning or quarantining or silencing certain groups. And we're going to take a deep dive into what that looks like today.
Yes, I think deplatforming over time has become probably one of the most relevant topics with social media, and so it's going to be fun to talk about. Before we get going, I just wanted to give just a general definition of what deplatforming is for anyone out there who has heard the term but maybe can't clarify exactly. Deplatforming, also known as no platforming, is a form of political activism or prior restraint by an individual, group, or organization with the goal of shutting down controversial speakers or speech and denying them access to a venue in which to express their opinion. I think this is a good way to put it. So let's dive in, guys.
Yeah, first off, the reason that this is coming up and it's a hot topic is because you have major figures such as Alex Jones, who is banned from Facebook, Apple, YouTube, and Spotify, as well as other characters like Milo Yiannopoulos being banned from Twitter. Steven Crowder now getting investigated by YouTube, and it's causing a concern among some Americans that there is an active effort to deplatform conservative and far right-wing voices online. And so that is why this has become a topic that we're going to discuss, and that why many people might have some issues with it.
Yep. So basically, I want to give just the background of a couple free speech decisions that I think have an effect and are now being kind of questioned in this time of transparency in social media. You had Schenck, versus the United States in 1919. It was a landmark court decision that stated that individuals are not entitled to speech that presents a clear and present danger to society. And I think right now this is a big issue because there's a big debate over what is harmful and what is just controversial.
Yeah, Grayson, where do you kind of see that line as far as what speech could be considered harmful to society and what is under the bounds of just political speech?
Yeah, see, that's kind of the big controversy, like you were saying earlier, Alex. You know, you can kind of see, especially in kind of the social media platforms, when people have a different viewpoint and they, bring up criticism, and it kind of, where does that criticism fall in line with kind of hate speech, or, getting to the point where it might incite violence. And it's kind of, people on the right tend to say, criticism is not hate speech, but then people on the left tend to say that, if you continually, berate somebody, um, where does that kind of fall in line? Could that, end up being harmful to them, or could that, eventually bring others to commit harmful acts against other people? So it's definitely, there's no right or wrong answer, I feel, but there's definitely, like I said, it's, people don't agree whether it's criticism or if it's actually hate speech.
I definitely think that I think many people, I mean, I don't want to speak for myself, but I definitely think that calling for violence is definitely something that needs to be stamped down, right? And I think so as far as going through the major cases that we've seen recently that have caused a lot of uproar, Alex Jones is the one that comes to mind, where it's pretty obvious that this guy was calling for violence in many ways. He was saying some issues can only be solved with guns. He had that whole issue about Sandy Hook being a conspiracy and people taking that seriously. And I think that in his case, right, it wasn't just the idea of that people didn't agree with Alex Jones. It was that he was getting to the point where he was influencing and calling people to do radical violent actions. So as far as that individual, I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I was
Right.
talking to Grayson about this last night. I think that Alex Jones is a very unique individual who obviously puts on a very strong stage persona. He's as much of an actor as he is a political ideologue, I guess. And my big issue with him is that I think he actually is a I don't think he believes a lot of the things he says, but he's trying to get a raise out of people. And I think that he actually himself is not that bad of a guy. But the problem is, I think there are a lot of crazy people out there, and the ideas he have does incite some form of violence. I mean, you have Pizzagate, and you have the Sandy Hook issue, and I think they are both really badly put. Because I mean, I think Alex Jones always has a pepper of truth to what he says. Basically, with the Pizzagate thing, he was talking about how the Clintons and a lot of other Democratic politicians were involved in child sex rings, and obviously that's not totally correct. But at the same time, there is an ounce of truth, as we're seeing with Epstein and several other cases. There is a lot of underage sex that unfortunately happens in Washington.
Yeah, it's one of those things where he takes that kernel of truth perhaps and explodes it into something that's not real. And I
Right.
think it's a business model. He lies to people
Totally.
to sell. He tells you that the water is poisoned, and then he's literally in the same episode will sell you a drug that's supposed to clean your water, and it's for 3 payments of $9.99.99, right? So, I think he's a unique case where he seems like a con man, and he's less genuine than some other people that have been silenced that are actual, like, real political operatives and ideologues.
Grayson, I want to ask you. So, for example, someone like Ben Shapiro and Coulter, right? Like they, for example, Ben Shapiro is against. I don't want to say against, but he doesn't believe that transgender issues are true. Do you think? Because I have several friends that say he shouldn't be allowed to speak at colleges, for example, because he is harmful to transgenders. What do you think about that argument?
Well, it's murky water, when you have, you don't want to intentionally harm people, and harm is more of a, like, if you look up the definition of committing an act of harm against somebody, it's more of the physical side. But you can't just completely deny the emotional side, right, or the mental side. And it's kind of to the point where that's where a different belief, does it actually hurt some other people, or does it not? And do you protect that person's right to believe in something different, or do you protect the person that is potentially hurt by things that you've stated? When you have kind of like back in February, I think it was, there was that journalist Megan Murphy, who was banned from Twitter for basically saying that men aren't women, and that she got in a big kind of Twitter fight with a transgender individual. And then you have on the Joe Rogan podcast, when he had Tim Pool on, I think we were discussing this yesterday, when he was talking to Dorsey about banning certain people, and it was about, actually they were talking about Megan Murphy, and how do you ban somebody on a platform who might say that doesn't believe in transgenderism, or do you ban them, or do you protect that person's belief? And that's, like I said, it's murky water. It's kind of, I believe that people should have a right to express their opinions, but like you were saying, Drew, not if it you can't call for an act of violence against a transgender individual, for instance. But if you're just basically stating in a kind of general, not against maybe a specific person, but again in the general kind of form, that say you don't believe that transgender individuals are in fact the sex that they believe they are, I don't know. I think that speech is protected.
That brings me to a point that I wanted to hammer home, is the idea of, or we have to kind of figure out, is social media the new public forum? Is social media the new, town hall, right? Because we don't live in a world where everyone in the town can all meet up at the local park and talk about issues. People don't do that anymore. We live in a world where you talk about issues online. And so now I wonder if we have to define social media as something that's considered a public forum, or at least parts of it where you can post is considered like a public forum, and then free speech rights would be more applied. There's one case law that suggests that the Supreme Court is in fact looking at social media as a public forum. It is Packingham v. North Carolina. This was in 2017. Now, the root of this issue is a little bit off of what we're talking about, but the end result actually leads to the public forum idea being applied to social media. So the issue was North Carolina was banning sex offenders, those that were put on a sex offender registry. Their idea was they wanted to ban sex offenders from using social media websites that allowed children to be a part of them, like a Facebook or a Twitter or a YouTube. At all. Like, you wouldn't be able to use any of those websites if they allowed any children to be on them. Well, the Supreme Court actually knocked this down, and they stated that, you are also eliminating people from knowing current events, checking ads for employment, and it says here, speaking and listening in the modern public square. So they suggested that social media is the modern public square, and that certain actions need to be protected, even for people that you deem undesirable, because it's First Amendment law.
See, that's
right.
That's an interesting point, but I kind of want to take a step back from this public forum, from this town hall, because I think in theory, yes, social media is becoming that. See, so I think the people that are in social media sites like Facebook or Twitter or even Reddit are kind of almost a virtual town hall. But at the same time, I think that the people that are running these companies do not look at them like an open town hall.
Oh,
I think a lot of these companies I think they almost kind of want to be somewhat of the social police. They want to do more virtue signaling than actually stopping hate. I read something interesting from reason.com, and it basically said, if Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook want to virtue signal by showing that they oppose controversial views, then deplatforming controversial people will work. And so but I don't think it actually gets to the root of the issue. And so I think we have a very big disconnect between the people that use these sites and the people that are running these sites.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I think there may need to be kind of a, the social media industry, I guess, do some self-regulation and think about, how do we treat speech, right? Now back to it's not like the idea of public forum is just anything goes, right? Because if you go to a public forum in person, if you go to the town hall on government land, you can't just do whatever you want. There are still rules. You can't throw Molotov cocktails, and you can't, you still have to abide by certain rules, but speech is protected. And I think that you're right. I think there is a disconnect, and I don't think that philosophy is adopted by the social media industry at large. I think some are better than others, but it still is. The reality is they are private companies that have a private domain, and then they can decide what the terms of service are.
Yeah, I'd like to also hammer that a little bit further. Like you're saying, whether you define it as a platform or a publisher, right? And publishers get to choose what content goes on versus a platform is a free, beacon for just opinion to an extent. But it's kind of interesting that I feel like Twitter is kind of the at the forefront of this, whether social media should be a platform or a publisher, because Twitter has now become basically the platform for politics. You have politicians, you see it with Trump all the time when he basically lets everybody know his policy on Twitter. And at that point, it gets to, when you see there was legal suits against Trump and Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria, for banning people or blocking people on their Twitter account, like Ryan Saavedra from the Daily Wire. And they consider that against, the First Amendment, because these people, these politicians' policies are, everyone gets their information and their policy changes and everything from Twitter. So it's kind of interesting that, I feel in a sense that maybe Ocasio-Cortez and Trump and some of these people, like, you have a right to ban people, consider on Instagram or Facebook, if you don't like someone, you want to block them. I feel like that's someone's kind of their right. But then again, since these people's policies go through on Twitter, it's kind of they've forfeited that right. And that's where it kind of changes on the platform versus publisher.
It's akin to, I think it was mentioned on one of the opinions on the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez problem, was that it's akin to like writing a letter in the newspaper. Like when you post a comment on someone's tweet, it's basically the same as writing an editorial in the newspaper. And if they block you, it's like getting rid of an editorial in the newspaper. And so, I think maybe the issue, like what you do there is, right, if you have an official verified congressman or woman account, right? This is the one that has the blue check that says Congresswoman Cortez. That's the one that you can't ban people. You're a public figure, and this is a public forum. If you want to have a personal one, so you can post memes or whatever, that's not official, not blue checked. That's your own prerogative. But I think I find myself agreeing with that. I think more and more that we are entering the age of social media is the public forum, is the new town hall. And we have, and so if you have these official verified accounts, like the president's, right? You have the president of the United States, like you said, putting everything out there on the table on Twitter, and it has to be open and public.
Well, and I think this all like doubles back to the idea, like all of this is just kind of goes back to the idea that we're starting to confuse harm with disagreement. I think that that's a big issue with the left right now, is that if you say something they don't agree with, if you say something controversial, it kind of just, and it's the same on the right. I mean, Trump is very guilty of this as well, is that it's easy to characterize someone as, for example, racist or a socialist or harmful, just because they say something you don't agree with. It's easier to call names than actually have a discussion. And I think by blocking people, it's just another part of that, it's another part of just saying, I don't really want to talk to you. And it kind of goes back to that ending monologue, I guess you could say, I had last week, is that when you stop talking to one another, you start to have serious issues. And I think that that's where this divide is that it's easier to push block than actually sit down and have a conversation. And I that's why I think deplatforming is awful. I just want to side to this, is that I think banning people for expressing controversial ideas also denies them the opportunity to be challenged. You know what I mean? And so if you have, for example, a white supremacist who has some very backwards views, I think it's better to let him talk than to put him into the darkness of just the dark web, because a lot of people will see what he's saying and be able to go, you know what, this guy's nuts. Like, these views are backwards and dark. But instead, if you just let this guy, for example, go on to Gab, which is a Twitter alternative used by many neo-Nazis, the unintended but entirely predictable consequence is that you're going to have a community of exiles.
I mean, but doesn't that happen already, even on Facebook and Twitter, without going to Gab? Aren't people already so entrenched in their ways that there's I rarely see a discussion in Facebook comments where someone is like, "Wow, you're right. I have to change my opinion based on the facts you presented me." Like, that doesn't happen.
True, but you see that the people that comment are just the ones with the loudest opinions. I think a lot of people that don't comment but still read these things I think it's more beneficial for people to see a discourse going on.
That's fair. That's fair. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, and like, there's the example of the synagogue shooting. The guy literally posted, let me see, "Screw your optics, I'm going in." And this was on Gab. And a lot of people say that if he had been on Twitter doing this, there might have actually been some people that saw it and maybe called the police. You know, there might have been some people that actually said something about it, but because he's in this entrenched underbelly, everyone's kind of just one-upping each other on there, you know? And I think it's just awful. I mean, someone could have contacted the police.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you could put that solely on Twitter, but I do understand what your idea there. Where do you fall, Grayson, on the idea of, like, you know, like how much can a private company with a private domain, like, I don't know, really, like, where do we draw the line between public forum and private companies, and how do we promote, you know, good discussion online?
You know, it's interesting because I always, you know, I've told this to Alex. I told him yesterday a couple times, actually. You know, I've especially with the Convention of States, the whole point is we're, you know, apprehensive about, you know, people in power. We don't, you know, we not the federal government in a sense. You know, when you have people at the top, we just power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you have, you know, big time CEOs, and this is where it's hard, especially when you want more of a free market kind of capitalist, you know, viewpoint on how the economy works. When you have these private companies, yes, they're private, and, you know, do they have the right to do or whatever with their company? Or then you get into that, you know, argument of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Are these CEOs abusing their power for a certain political ideology? And there's a couple examples, you know, when you have, you know, we'll go back to the Steven Crowder thing where he was demonetized from YouTube, where he didn't, I wouldn't say definitively, but they stated that he didn't break any of their rules per se, but that he was, you know, harassing Carlos Maza from Vox, kind of referring to him as queer. And was it insensitive? Yeah, it was definitely. But then you have Samantha Bee referring to Ivanka Trump as a feckless C word, and nothing really happened to her. Do I agree with either of them? Was it insensitive on both their parts? Yes, but you kind of see the divide in certain companies choosing one side versus the other. And you see it too with when Tim Pool was discussing with Joe Rogan over Meghan Murphy, how she was banned from Twitter. And then when you had the Covington kids fiasco, and there was actually a Twitter account that referred to those kids that they should be killed, that you should throw those kids in the wood chipper, and nothing happened to his account or her account. I'm not exactly sure if it was a he or a her, but it's just you see certain companies do choose sides, and I don't I don't disagree with that. I mean, everyone's going to have their own kind of side that they choose, but when it gets down to a point where then you like in Crowder's instance, you take away a form of money that he gets from those videos. That's where it's kind of, you can't, unless it's actually causing harm, like physically, or Crowder was inciting violence to Carlos Maza, but he wasn't. He was just making fun of him, and it's insensitive. Yeah, I won't disagree with that, but I feel that people have the right to be insensitive, and this kind of, we've created this sort of uh, society where people are, you know, we think you shouldn't be insensitive at any cost, but it's what comedians do, right? And
Yeah.
people love comedians for that very reason, that they're mean to everybody. It's like you have the right to be mean.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to, yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think the thing is, Drew, is that if social media is the new townhouse or the public forum, the people that are running them cannot have a left or right tinge, you
Yeah.
know? Like, because I think it's a true point that conservatives are targeted more so than liberals when it comes to how far are we going to let you go. And yes,
Yeah.
there are bad people on the right. There is a dark fringe on the right that should be silenced, I think. But at the same time, I do think that just because you say something offensive doesn't mean you should be completely off, And so if we're going to have a town forum, I mean, like I remember Jack Dorsey was on several podcasts and I was listening to him talk about it. And it's same with Mark Zuckerberg, is I think these guys are kind of clueless to what is going on. I think that they're out of it when it comes to actually what is going on these platforms.
Yeah, I think that I'm very hesitant to say that there's like a conspiracy to silence the right. Like I don't think it's at that point. I do think that you guys are correct that there is a cognitive bias on who is, breaking the terms of service. Because I mean, I think we can just assume that the average Silicon Valley guy in social media probably has a left wing bias, and we've seen that come to fruition with who gets targeted easier or who's brought to the light, right? Because again, some of these reports are people saying, "Hey, they're doing something I think is wrong," and it gets a lot of retweets or a lot of traction, and then the company does something about it. I would be hesitant to say that it's like a plan to try and silence the right, but I do think it is a bias that they're just not realizing and they're not regulating themselves on. I think there's some interesting middle grounds, right? Because like we've talked about flat out bans and complete terms of service stuff, but Reddit had an interesting middle ground where the subreddit The Donald, which had been around for a while and had been pretty contentious on the website, Reddit didn't really do much with them for years, and then recently with the Oregon issue, with the issue over environmental laws getting voted in Oregon, some of the Donald members were posting full-on posts that were staying up that were calling for violence against Oregon police officers and Oregon government officials. That was the last straw as far as Reddit was concerned. But instead of banning the subreddit, they did what's called a quarantine, which is quarantine is where the top posts on the Donald subreddit won't reach like the open and public front page. You would have to search for it within the website. And when you do search for it, it gives a disclaimer that's like, hey, this has been quarantined. You're still allowed to visit and use this part of the site, but it's not going to show up on like the main public page. I thought that was an interesting middle ground. I hope that it's a short-term solution. I don't think it's a long-term solution. But it was one way to kind of slap the wrist on the Donald for having inciting violence's issues, without completely banning their platform altogether.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's been an idea that's bounced around even on Twitter and YouTube as well, is that maybe there is a YouTube Plus or a YouTube Lite, where basically if you want to get into controversial material, or I mean even sexually R-rated material, even, there is a specific side that you have to verify your own account
Right.
and say that you're willing to accept this. But then there's also a light version, where it's not controversial, there's nothing R-rated, And maybe that is where things need to go, is there's not just one platform for everybody. I know that sounds kind of divisive, but I think you're right, is that maybe we do need to filter things more.
Yeah. I think going back to what Grayson you mentioned about you were talking about being insensitive and being offensive. I agree with you. I saw the thing where Crowder was making fun of that Vox reporter, and he does it a lot. I mean, he calls him the Mexican gay, the Mexican queer,
Yeah.
his little gay graphs and stuff. It definitely is like, he's obviously trying to be offensive and insensitive. But like you said, I mean, if we tried to ban everyone on YouTube for being insensitive and offensive, I mean, half the site would be gone. Like YouTube is full of
Right.
people making fun of each other. I mean, that's like people make a living off of that. And so I definitely think that the Steven Crowder case, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of him, but I don't think he should have his livelihood taken away for being insensitive. I do think that a lot of this does come down to case by case basis, right? Like you have to look at individual cases to get the full picture. But yeah, I definitely think that there is an obvious bias against people that are purposely trying to be offensive, but you have a right to do that.
Well, I think, like you were saying before, that it's not like it's yeah, I don't believe it's a conspiracy either. But I think it might actually be some sort of subconscious belief, because when you have that when you see that case of Project Veritas had that Google that senior Google engineer, Greg Capola. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but he came out and said that they are the ones who write the algorithms. So if you have a subconscious bias, you are putting that subconsciously into that algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can see that. I don't know the fullest extent to this, but there was the hearing with PragerU and YouTube, and how some of their videos were they weren't getting the views, or they weren't coming up in the search bar tool, or whatever you want to call it. And they were saying that, like you were putting that YouTube Lite or something like that, there's the YouTube Kids. And what YouTube was saying, or what the Google was saying, is that it was some of those videos were deemed unfit for YouTube Kids due to explicit content. Yeah, and probably some of them are, maybe you don't want your kids hearing some sort of politically charged speech. But there was a case where it had, I don't know, I'd probably have to look this up, but it either had to do with abortion, or something of that light. And the PragerU was accusing Google in the suit that they and they deemed it as kind of pornography to keep it off viewership of YouTube. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's not a flat out just conspiracy theory. Oh, we have to undermine these people. But I do think there is some sort of subconscious effort in how certain people, who are in charge of these sites and who run and make these algorithms and who kind of put content on, consciously, maybe they don't want to, but subconsciously they always have that feeling in the back of their mind, and that might influence certain things when putting on content.
I think that's a great point, because we have to realize is that most of these companies are from Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's in California, and one of the more progressive liberal parts of California. And I mean, I think that's a very good point. It's a subconscious idea. I mean, I'm not saying, I think you're both right. There's no conspiracy to do so. But when you're running a company and you're a liberal, there are going to be under the table biases. Sorry, under the table is probably not a good word, but and that kind of goes back to what I've been really trying to push, is that if you want to be a town hall, obviously, I mean, I guess town halls in every town are going to be liberal or conservative or independent or whatnot. But I think that if you want to run an open dialogue, we have to throw these biases out. And it's okay if the owners have their own personal opinions, but a subconscious view will be seen in these companies. We've seen it already.
I think I think we're all in agreement there, and I think the next step then is to have a self-regulating body come up. Obviously, we can't force them to do that, but there has been instances in industries before where self-regulation has worked. If you just look, one example that comes to mind is the ESRB ratings for video games in the 80s and 90s. They were a hot topic with games like Mortal Kombat with blood and people ripping out spines. And there was legislation being threatened by politicians. Well, instead of dealing with that getting regulated by the government, the industry as a whole in the United States agreed, how about we rate our games? We won't sell certain games that are M-rated to those 18 and up. And we'll regulate it and have a rating system so that parents and consumers can understand what they're getting into. So I think in the same light that I hope that at some point these social media giants would have kind of a self-regulating form of like, we need to figure out that we need to realize that we are the new town hall. How do we protect people's rights while maintaining a reasonable terms of service? And then how do we avoid having a bias against who we employ those rules on? I doubt that'll happen anytime soon, especially since of how competitive these companies are against each other. But industry self-regulating has worked in the past, and it could be possible if things get bad enough.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so I really quickly want to turn the conversation because I think we agree on this. I want to ask you guys what you think of this. It kind of goes in a little different direction. And what's one of the biggest criticisms of deplatforming? And I got this line that says, any kind of censorship can create an aura of conspiracy that makes forbidden ideas attractive. This actually happened in Europe over the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years. And they actually link it to why there's a lot of Holocaust denial in parts of Europe. Is that because there's such a high censorship of Holocaust discussion in some countries? For example, I mean, even Germany, they don't want to talk about the Holocaust. And in other countries, they deny these Holocaust people. So if you're shut down for denying the Holocaust, it actually creates this aura of conspiracy in which people go, why are they being shut down if this is just a conspiracy? You know what I mean?
Well, I want to clarify something, though. They do talk about the Holocaust in Germany. It's part of their public education. It's illegal to have any Nazi propagandism.
Right. And I think that it's an interesting double-edged sword is because I think it does create this kind of conspiracy backlash.
Well, you see it in all throughout history, right? Remember that book, The Swerve?
Yeah.
When the guy goes to back in, I don't know what the time period was. I forget.
It was 1300s, I think.
1300s. Yeah. And when he goes, he has to go to monasteries because those were the only places that actually kept all the old manuscripts and books that were written when, who's in power, if they don't agree or, they conquered a certain civilization and they end up erasing all that history and erasing, destroying all books and stuff like that. And that's, when you go around and you try to find them from monasteries and stuff to bring them back to light so that people could read them and see a part of history that, almost was wiped out. And you see when people try to do that and try to especially with, I'm not sure to the extent of the Holocaust denying kind of movement, but you see when people don't read history, and they don't, they don't understand it, and then you see a lot of people in schools. I even asked a couple kids here in Truckee, bunch of high school kids, right? And I asked them, or no, it wasn't. It was actually a video that I watched, and it was a guy who goes onto college campus, and he asked the kids what was Pearl Harbor, and they can't even name the date. They thought it was in Florida. It was pretty bad.
Dear God.
Yeah, and
Dear
so
God.
when you deny certain forms of speech, I guess, no matter how unpopular or at the time, you're going to deny a certain part of, it's like two sides of the same coin. You have one ideology versus the other, and both of them need to exist. And that's why you have the Democrats and the Republicans. They both need each other because one wants to progress a lot at a faster rate, I would say, more of the Thomas Paine kind of ideology versus the Edmund Burke, where one is, apprehensive and wants to progress at a much slower rate. Both need each other to bring one up and bring the other back. And when you have certain ideologies being silenced, that's when it's, the issue. And I think where it goes from there is you need to define the rules, right? And if there's no specific set of rules, right? Like, so there's free speech under the First Amendment, and that doesn't protect incitement to violence and certain other forms of speech, like sexually explicit with children, content like that. And there's a few others. And so you say, okay, is all speech besides those free to say? But then certain companies, right, and they say it violates the terms of service if you continually attack an individual for their sexual orientation or whatever the case may be. Then it starts to get murky because every company has their own set of rules, and then it's like, well, where do we set the, like, where's the point that we stop, and who is the person that sets those rules? Is it the government or is it these private companies? And I think that's where the that's where the problem lies.
I think in a perfect world, which we definitely don't live in, I think in a perfect world it would be, like I mentioned, like a forum of the social media giants figuring it out for themselves. I think unfortunately though, it might get so bad and people might get so divided that it might be the kind of thing where the government has to step in and be like, you guys have a responsibility now. You guys aren't just a private company selling ads, which is what Facebook likes to think of themselves as. It's like you have a responsibility to protect speech, and like you have an influence on whole democracies, and they need to act accordingly.
So really
Right.
quick, I wanted to bring up one other part of deplatforming before we move on, and it's the issue with deepfakes. Basically, I'm really concerned about the future of deplatforming when you take into account the evolution of deepfake technology. And this is the issue: is so say you have a well-known figure, such as, I don't know, let's say
Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi. Yeah. Say that now a deepfake video comes out of her saying something extremely racist, and she gets deplatformed for it. That is really scary to me because as this technology gets better, what if you get canceled for saying something you never did?
Yeah, there has
That.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Grayson.
go for it.
No, go ahead, Grayson.
Oh, thanks. It's kind of, well, there was that deep fake of Nancy Pelosi where they slowed her speech and made her sound drunk. And I think it goes into where the intention lies, right? Is your intention to make fun of her, or is your intention to harm her politically and make her, could she get deplatformed for, like you said, with deepfake technology? I think it's definitely, and it's hard. Obviously, that's a pretty high bar for a legal standard, is defining what was your intention in doing that action. I don't know in the case of Nancy Pelosi if the person who did that was just doing it to make her sound funny, or was he actually trying to hurt her politically?
I think either way though, people bite the onion. Even if the guy is like, "Oh, I was just trying to make a joke," there's enough people on there that obviously thought it was real. And
Yeah, that's where the problem lies.
yeah.
Well, and it gets scary going down the road. I mean, the technology is still in its infant stage, but I mean, for example, what if there's so much technology on the three of us, all the machine learning and information storage that Google, Facebook, all these companies do. Then you had, unfortunately, I did do the Face app or whatever that's called, and so there's so much technology out there that, I mean, what if they make a video of me saying something I never did, and then I can't get into a law school or a job because of that?
Yeah.
And I never said it.
I would hope that there's also the technology to realize that it's a deep fake, right? Like right now we're at the point where if you have like photo editing experts, they can pretty much tell like that's a deep fake. That won't always,
Right.
that may not always be the case. So hopefully we have the technology to like, go back and see that, okay, this has been edited. His mouth here has obviously been edited. But yeah, no, we are definitely entering some dangerous territory as a society at large.
Yeah, I mean, and so this is a little different, but I think there's an economic issue of deplatforming as well, and it's been seen with companies like Amazon and Microsoft who want to limit the people that they sell their products to. For example, I think it was Amazon, or no, sorry, it was Microsoft didn't want to sell to the Department of Defense because they didn't agree with some of the policies of the Department of Defense with our wars overseas. And then Amazon didn't want to sell some of their technology to ICE because of, obviously political disagreements. And I think it's an unwelcome development in the culture wars if companies that today sell software or services to anyone who can afford them change their minds and instead sell only to businesses or government agencies that they're politically aligned with. I think that's an interesting side step, and it's kind of anti-democratic and anti-capitalism.
Where do you fall on that one, Grayson?
It kind of goes back to what I was saying about certain like governments or whatever banning certain books, destroying them, erasing certain history. It's kind of like you could say I'm sure everyone in agreement here and most of the world that Hitler was a very evil person. But do you ban Mein Kampf? It's kind of, you think about it and you say, should we just get rid of Hitler from the history books? Well, no, I think people should that should be available and people should read it and understand, they can find out who Hitler was and understand what he did. Because then if you completely erase it, then you're not going to remember Hitler in the next few generations, and you're not going to take that and say, okay, well, if you see another person like this, don't appease them.
I think, but going back to Alex's specific example, though, with Amazon and Microsoft not selling to the U.S. government, I think that should be absolutely allowed. I think we're going down a dangerous path if we think that a company will be forced to do market business with the federal government, and if they don't, it's undemocratic. That sounds tyrannical to me. I think that Amazon and Microsoft at this point don't have a monopoly on their markets. I know people think Amazon does, but they don't. It's not a monopoly. Mm-hmm. And therefore, that they should absolutely be able to choose who they do business with. And if they don't want to do business with a branch of the federal government, that should absolutely be their right. I think we go down a dangerous path if we force people to do business with the federal government as a private company.
That's well said, but I think that you're right, but I also disagree to a certain extent, is because as they keep sucking up the industry, Amazon, if Amazon keeps growing and things such as this, Amazon does sell drone technology to the government already. And so, if they are one of the biggest indicators in the game, and what if other companies follow suit? It does kind of become a politically driven market. And everything's political, but we do need to sometimes throw the politics out and just work together economically.
I frankly don't think we'll ever get to a point where there'll be no companies willing to sell drones to the federal government. It's so much money. Fair. It's such a imagine getting that account, right? Like, oh hey, you're now the supplier to the military for drones. That's billions and billions and billions of dollars. I highly doubt we'll ever get to the point where the entire drone industry holds hands and says we're going to protest the federal government. I just don't see that happening.
Fair point. I kind of, if you guys are okay, I kind of want to just touch on the debates.
Let's do it.
I think this was a great talk. Obviously, I think there's an agreement that there needs to be some sort of self-regulation amongst these companies, and maybe it does require governments. But let's move on to the debates. What do you guys think?
Grayson, first thoughts.
Well, first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is Marianne Williamson. She had herself an interesting, I think we were talking about this yesterday, Alex, that she kind of did the Obama-esque appeal in fighting for, quote unquote, the soul of America. I think that was a good appeal on her part. I don't think she really went into the policy specifically, but by appealing to kind of having, it's sort of a religious appeal. I think people would really resonate with that. And like we said yesterday, Alex, Obama pretty much got elected on that sort of appeal, and so did Trump in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, she obviously comes from the background of motivational speaking, right? So this is what she does best. When she finally does get enough time from the moderators, she knows she needs to utilize it with her really appeal to emotion and appeal to, what you said, like appeal to the spirit of people. She's good at that. As far as on the ground policies, I don't even know what she thinks. So
Yeah.
so we'll see. She's good in debates, but I doubt she'd probably be good as a policymaker.
Yeah,
No.
and on candidates that aren't polling very well, I kind of want to just say night too. I think Andrew Yang was very impressive. I think he was allowed a very little amount of time, but he did a good job again emphasizing that middle America is struggling.
Right.
He said immigrants are being scapegoated for issues that have nothing to do with within our economy. And I think the thing is he's recognized it, is that automation and globalization have changed the world. And I loved it when he's like, so he never wears a tie, right? He's kind of he has this kind of, I think he's trying to go for this appeal to kind of the working class, and I loved it when he said, here we are up on the stage with makeup attacking each other, and we've kind of forgot what this is about. And
Yeah,
I
that was
I think that
perfect.
I think that he's a really interesting guy. And unfortunately, I think people such as himself, Marianne Williamson, they're just overshadowed by the BS going on between Kamala Harris and Biden,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren and Bernie. It's just become attacking. And I think this next election, it seems like Democrats are running against themselves more than Trump. They're running against, it's kind of seems like a referendum on Obama to me.
It's the new versus the old, right? It's the new progressive left versus the establishment left, and we're seeing that. It's the moderates versus the progressives, and we're seeing that come into play. I mean, obviously, there's going to be an infighting in any primary because,
of course,
you want to be the first one to pass the post, right? But I definitely see that too. I definitely see that there's like an internal dialogue in the Democratic Party of like, how do we want to really embrace the new progressivism, or do we hold true to what we think works, which is establishment Democrats? Except I would argue that 2016 showed that establishment Democrats don't work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I wrote an article on our Tonic Accord website about this, and how some people say they wish we could just go back to the Obama era and forget Trump. But I don't think Obama would be as popular now as he was. The party has truly changed, and it seems to be a bit of a referendum. But also, I don't know if Obama could still beat Trump like he did at the time. I mean, we're seeing Biden just put out on a limb. And yeah, you're right. I think it is the progressive wing, and it almost seems like a bit of a coup inside the party, much like what the Republicans had in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think, Grayson?
Yeah, that's interesting, and it is actually a bunch of the quote unquote progressive, like the New Democrats, did come out and kind of say that Obama didn't work. Obama wasn't as good as everyone claimed he was. And it's funny because you kind of think when this primary is over, and the Democratic candidate goes up and wins and goes up against Trump, I wonder how many of these people will come back and be like, this is the best person, we all need to support them. And it's funny how they're kind of eating each other, but in the end, they'll probably come back and, do everything they can to make sure their candidate beats Donald Trump, because that is, that was the start of the game. That's the goal, the mission. And I think they're sidetracking, obviously, by attacking each other, but it'll be funny to see if they actually come back and go full on swing with their elected official.
I mean, that's no different than 2016 when you had,
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham calling Trump a con man and everyone calling Trump this and that.
Yeah.
And as soon as he won it was, Trump trained, all the way. Very, very few Republicans, especially the ones that were up for elected office again, would go against him.
Yeah, it's funny that Ted Cruz is now one of Trump's biggest supporters.
Call him in. Yeah, didn't he say something like he thought Ted Cruz's dad killed Kennedy, and now? Oh man, what a time!
Yeah, but I want to backtrack a little bit onto the fact that I think that the Democratic Party might be truly in a stage of crisis if they actually want to win this debate. And I think Michael Bennet, who I think it might be one of the best candidates on the stage, moderate-wise, but obviously he's probably not going to go further. he criticized the Medicare for All option and getting rid of private insurance by saying, don't distract from the truth on the specifics. And I actually think that line, don't distract from the truth, kind of sums up where the Democratic debates have gone, is that I think they're kind of living in a dream world where, they keep saying, don't use Republican talking points when any moderate brings up any criticism of these almost socialist policies that a lot of these candidates are pushing. And they need to listen to this. They're not all Republican talking points. They're just moderates that don't know how we're going to do some of these policies.
Yeah, that's such a like a cop out of a response. Like, oh, that's just a Republican talking point. Like, okay, well, if you're not worried about it, then debate it. Then explain why it's not. Explain why that talking point is invalid. But don't just blow it off like, oh, that's a Republican talking point, therefore I don't need to address it. It does. I agree. It makes the party look bad. It makes the progressives look bad when they're not even willing to discuss certain concerns that people in the middle or the right have.
Yeah, that's Kamala Harris's biggest issue, is that she's really good at attacking, but she doesn't really seem to have any actual arguments. Like when Joe Biden asked her why they now both have the same view on busing, she just went back to, I was that girl who needed the busing. And, it's and then when Tulsi Gabbard, called her out, which I thought Tulsi Gabbard had a really good point, is why are you joking about marijuana on the Breakfast Club when you locked up 1,500 people for it? And then all she said was, I'm a top tier candidate, and Tulsi Gabbard's polling at 0%. That's all. That was her only response. And she's a Bashar al-Assad sympathizer. It's like, it's not an argument. You're just throwing the blame,
Yeah, she performed pretty poorly. Kamala Harris did.
Yeah. Grayson, what do you think on that? Like, Grayson, I know you probably don't like a lot of the candidates, but who do you think going forward would be the best option as an alternative to Trump?
I think it's Biden. Not necessarily agreeing that he's the best candidate, but I believe he's going to be the candidate. No matter how much they attack him and stuff. And the fact that he doesn't seem to have a lot of energy on the debate stage. But I believe he's still going to contain those moderate voters that Trump won and Obama won. And those really are the deciding factors. Since we're so politically polarized now, you're going to have Republicans vote Trump. You're going to have Democrats vote whoever the Democratic candidate is. That's a given. So you need these middle ground voters, and alienating them is going to be the biggest mistake if any of them do that. And a lot of these extreme policies do not resonate with the middle ground people. And Biden, I believe, he's kind of flip-flopped on certain stuff, but he's still going to have that support, I believe.
I agree. That's a keen observation. I think we're probably going to have to repeat it many times in this podcast over the next year, but it's going to come down to a few states. Like it doesn't come down to what the entire country believes. It's going to come down to Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Arizona, and maybe Ohio too. But it's those middle ground voters, the people that have voted for Obama in 2008 and then voted for Trump in 2016. They're the ones that people need to grab.
Yeah, I think I was telling Grayson this last night, because that's a good point, is that people call them the Obama-Trump voters. Do you know what they should be called? Is the Biden-Trump voters. Because I think people underestimate Biden's importance in Obama's candidacy. Obama obviously got the progressives, minorities, and the coasts. But if I would argue that if it wasn't for Biden, Obama wouldn't sucked up these conservative blue-collar areas. And so I think Biden has a formula to get these areas, and if we don't listen to him and keep calling him a racist and outdated, I think people are missing that Obama's candidacy was more of an exception than the rule, because he beat these areas that usually went conservative.
Right. Right. That's a good point.
I think that the party's it's a coup on Obama and Biden to a certain extent.
Yeah. Hopefully Biden doesn't have too many bullet wounds by the time this primary is over.
Yeah.
Go easy on me, kid.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I heard people were saying like that was like ageist and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh God.
I think it's just Uncle Joe being Uncle Joe, but
I have to say it was hilarious when he tried to talk about how to find or to text that number at the end. And he literally sounded like he was in the 50s, man.
Yeah, Joe Biden 3030303 or whatever.
3300.
So you can call toll free 1-800-JOE. Like, bro, that's a little past the. We're not in those times anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's I mean, his usage of malarkey and all this stuff, I mean, he's definitely outdated, but he has experience. He has experience.
Yeah.
This has been fun, guys. I've enjoyed the conversation. I mean, I think it's good to have a conversation where we all kind of are in a different part of the political spectrum, and we can still, laugh over some of the chaos and craziness.
Absolutely. Grayson, thank you so much for joining this episode of the podcast. It was a pleasure to have you. And I think we had a great, fantastic discussion. Any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Well, first I'd like to, express my appreciation for having me on. This was, like you said, a great conversation. And I think, just going forward, it's so funny because every week is just right when the week starts, you just see all this news and everything, just so much crazy stuff just happens every week. And it's definitely, with everything that's happening, there's going to be a lot to talk about in the future, and it's going to be quite exciting. Maybe a little scary.
Scary and exciting. Politics in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So again, you can check out some of Grayson's stuff at the Common Sense Chronicles. And then also be sure to look up Tonic Accord on YouTube, Podbean, iTunes, Instagram. Let us know what you think. And we will be continuing to do the weekly updates of this podcast. So stay tuned.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.